fans, wherever you may be. Welcome back for another edition of the Seahawks Playbook Podcast. Join your host, Bill Alpstead, and co-host, sports writer and football analyst Keith Myers as we talk Seahawks football. Hey, Seahawks fans, welcome back to another edition of the Seahawks Playbook Podcast. I'm your host, Bill Alpstead, sitting down with co-host Keith Myers. Hey.
How's it going, Bill?
It's going good. Happy New Year, right? Is this the first show of the new year or the second show? I can't even remember.
I think it's the first show of the new year. Maybe.
Okay.
I don't know.
Yeah.
We'll say yes. Happy New Year.
Happy New Year. Yeah.
You know, it is nice to actually be having a show after a win. It feels like it's been forever.
And a solid, convincing win.
Yeah.
At that.
I mean, it may have been the Lions, right? And the Lions are one of the worst teams in the NFL. But anytime you put up a 50 burger, it doesn't matter who you're playing.
Yeah. So in the NFL, and the Lions have been playing well the last couple of weeks. Winners of two of their last three.
They crushed Arizona. It wasn't just like, they
showed up and Arizona did not show up. I will say that. Yeah. Seattle 51, Lions 29. Seahawks put up nearly 500 total net yards. Wilson was 20 of 29 for 236 yards, 4 touchdowns, so highly efficient. Rashad Penny had a day, 25 rushes, 170 yards, 2 touchdowns, had a few that were long, and he just looks like a different player. I mean, just crazy. And then DK Metcalf with 3 touchdowns. We had 3 interceptions on the other side of the ball. So we've just got a ton to talk about on the game itself. It was just one of those deals where everything comes together, and we just haven't had a lot of that this year. So when it happened, I don't care if it's the Lions or whoever, when it all comes together and it works really well, you can kind of see the potential of this team, this roster, the coaching staff, Russell Wilson, everything just kind of works. And, if they would have had 3 or 4 or 5 of these sort of games throughout the year, we wouldn't be having near the conversation that we're having now. They lost a ton of games by 1 score, games in the past that they'd won, with Russell Wilson being injured. Maybe we win a couple of additional games. We're having a completely different conversation about playoffs and all that sort of stuff. And now the off season is the off season, no playoffs, losing record. Now, I noticed, and we'll get to the game, but I noticed we're not even at the end of the season yet. And the level of Russell Wilson speculation is already in mid off season form, picked up right where we left off pre-draft process last year, which is just silly. I don't get it. I don't get it. But here you're hearing guys like Adam Schefter out there he's got a feeling, or he's hearing enough scuttlebutt out there where he's got a feeling that the league feels like Russell Wilson and Pete Carroll and all that stuff is moving on into a, whatever that means. Of course, that speculation to him means they're parting ways. Russell Wilson's getting traded. Pete Carroll's leaving, etc.
And I don't think any
and
of
it just leads. I know, and it just leads into this perpetual conversation. And then you have all these secondary sites that pick up that little tidbit of information, turn that feeling into full-blown, this is actually happening, and life as we know it is completely over. And it feeds into this narrative, into online sports media and talk show stuff and online comment threads and so forth that are just, you might as well just avoid it, because it's completely over the top, completely speculative, yet the language being used is almost authoritarian in its knowledge and its truth and its power to convince you that it's actually a done deal. And I don't read it that way.
No,
and we did not read it that way last year, Keith. Last year, you and I were on the same train almost the entire offseason. I had a little bit of speculation and called it as such. what could happen if Russell were to leave. But other than that, you and I were in the same boat thinking, this is an overplay. This is overplayed. Yeah. Somebody's taken this small narrative and turned it into a larger than life thing. Mm-hmm. And when you listen to Pete Carroll in the offseason, like the post-draft news conferences and so forth, they shifted that narrative, thankfully, kind of pulled the team back together. Russell Wilson, he was never serious about leaving. We didn't think it was that way. We continued to have conversations throughout the entire offseason. We've never been closer. And it kind of played out that way. And now here we are again.
There's a couple different parts of this that are really frustrating. One is you go through and listen. People asked Russ about is this your last home game in Seattle before this game, and his response is, he's like, I want to retire here. I want to be a Seahawk forever.
Right.
He's like,
people don't hear that though.
No, and
people hear, I hope.
Or he goes,
I haven't played my last game here.
He says, I get that it's a business, but if it's up to me, I want to be here. So he's saying that if he leaves, it's because the team wants him gone, but he's not going anywhere. And then when they ask Pete Carroll, his response is, we love Russ. We want him here. I mean,
the narrative, the narrative outside the team doesn't match the narrative between player and coach.
Yeah. And Pete says, Russ has a say in where he wants to play. But we love him and we want him here. And what he's acknowledging.
And by the way, he's under contract for 2 years and we have team control for a total of 4.
Yeah. And that's the other part. And so CBS had this story where they were like, with no extension in sight, Russell Wilson's Seattle exit is looming. Like that was the headline.
How many times?
He's not asking for an extension.
Have you seen any player of any caliber extended 2 years with 2 years remaining in his contract? How many times?
None.
Did Marshawn Lynch get a little teeny bump or something like that?
He did. Lynch did.
He was literally the only one.
Yep. Everyone else wanted it after Lynch did, and the team kept saying no.
Even Bobby Wagner wanted one a little bit, and Chancellor held out, like a misinformed kind of holding out thing where it cost him, right at the beginning of the season a couple years ago, where he thought he could kind of get that play as well. It just
didn't happen. But no, the thing is, he hasn't asked for one. That hasn't been the play in all of this. This idea that all of this is about him getting a contract extension, where did that come from?
I have no idea.
That is someone who's completely clueless to the situation, wanting to write about Wilson's exit, but not knowing anything about the possibility of Wilson's exit and just making an assumption it's about a contract. It has nothing to do with the contract.
Correct.
That one was just dumb. And so, but of course that's out there now and people are like, oh, he's just asking for more money. He's never asked for more money. What he asked for was a say. He asked for
improved blocking.
And he asked
and that was a repetitive narrative from his own coach.
Yeah. And the only thing that he really asked for was just a say in things. Like he wanted a spot at the table. He didn't want control over who his linemen are or over any of that, but he wanted a seat at the table when those decisions were being made. And he got it. He got to help pick Shane Waldron.
Yes.
Okay. I mean, that's what he asked for. That's what he was given.
Yeah. And I'm sure that he was asked about Gabe Jackson before we made that trade. I'm sure that he was asked about Jamal Adams. Like, hey, what do you think about adding like a really good piece on the defense? Blah, 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 blah. I'm sure those conversations happen all the time. That may have been on the defense. I'm sure, though, that Russ is in the building when these things are happening. They may pull him in from the hallway and just say, hey, what do you think? When you have a franchise piece like that, he's a piece. He's part of the process when you're building a team and the team roster and all that kind of stuff. Now, obviously more on the offensive side than the defensive side. I'm just saying a guy like that, a guy like Bobby Wagner, same thing. He's involved in decisions. He may be involved in offensive decisions because he might know a guy or he might have played under a coach that they might have some sort of connection. It's just it's a business. It's players, it's football, it's a team. And so it just goes hand in hand. I just honestly, I don't know where the narratives come from. I hesitate to say guys like Schefter and stuff make stuff up. I just do.
Schefter
they
doesn't make
just,
stuff
but
up,
if you read exactly what he said, he started his sentence off with a feeling.
mm-hmm. It's
That's
a
the
feeling
important
around.
part.
It's a feeling around the league, which means when he talks to other coaches, other
who are
GMs,
speculating.
not in Seattle, but
Right.
other places.
Yes.
What are they suspecting will happen?
Yes.
But they're not in the building and they don't
And they're
know.
not connected. Right.
Yeah. And so
yeah, he puts this out into
from.
the ether, which
Of course he does.
Which adds to the pile.
Well, true. But that's his job.
And where he's known to be 95% factual. At least 95%, right, well, Keith? He doesn't put that stuff out where it's a feeling. Those sorts of things don't necessarily happen with Schefter very often.
Actually, they do. They do all the time. They do all the time in the off season because there's all sorts of feelings, but he never comes out and says, "Hey, this is happening." He said, "Hey, the feeling around the league is that this is going to happen." And then when it doesn't happen, his response is, "I didn't report this. I just said I talked to people at other teams that told me this is what they were thinking." He's reporting what he's being told. He's not making anything up. But when he says that, when he goes, "Oh, their feeling around the league is that this is going to happen," he's admitting he doesn't have firsthand knowledge of anything from the team. He's just being told that from other teams.
So I'll ask you, and we haven't had a conversation, but I'll just ask you this anyway. So what? And it's not like anybody cares what the official opinion of Bill and Keith are in the Seahawks Playbook Podcast or anything, but how should we approach this subject this offseason? Because there's a lot of speculation. So should we speculate? Or should we just sit back and wait and allow everything to kind of happen and kind of report as it comes in on a factual basis?
Well, we aren't reporters. We are
correct.
And so we can discuss what's out there. I think that is perfectly okay.
So as in today.
Yeah, and we can speculate as to, hey, if you were in charge, what would you do? Or if you were making this decision and Russ has been asked to be traded, what would you ask for in compensation? But we don't have the connections to come out and say, hey, this is what we know, because we don't know. For us, it is speculation on our part, but we have a feeling as to what's going on, and we aren't pushing a narrative because we don't care about clicks.
I think the important thing to note is not only is it just a feeling, but we can read. We have the ability to parse language.
Yes,
and so.
And we can do so. You can read between the lines that are there, and we can actually look at nuance.
Yes. Now, some that report on this or talk about it in the media or, secondary media. And what I mean by that is other people around media like us, other shows, other podcasts, other bloggers, that sort of thing. A lot of folks, and I'm just overarching, seem to have a real challenge with, and I'll use last year as an example. There was just a lot of momentum about a certain side of the story that was being propagated last year that was really frustrating.
Well, the reason for that is because if you are a radio personality, it gets listens. If you are a blogger or, someone that writes for a site, it gets clicks. People are going to gravitate for what gets ratings, what gets clicks, what gets listens. I mean, because that's the name of the game. We are in an industry where it used to be you earned a salary for working for a newspaper and being right and having the newspaper's, credibility as your backbone. Today,
and Peabodys and Pulitzers and all that stuff were awarded based on the quality of the
reporting. Yes. Today, it's based on clicks. If you generate more clicks, you generate more ad revenue, and salaries, wages are tied to revenue. It's all
and
revenue
quality
sharing.
Of story and so forth is secondary.
Yes, because if you generate clicks, then you're making money for your parent company, and that's what matters. And so some of it is deliberate, and some of it is literally just everybody's talking about this. We're going to talk about it too.
Okay. So we got plenty of time between now and say, second, third week of free agency when all of this will be settled. So we'll have time to kind of figure it out. We'll follow along, but for me personally, I'm going to follow the facts and what I hear out of the horse's mouth rather than all this secondary sort of speculation. So if Russ and the team want to take care of this early in the process and put out statements reaffirming the relationship or whatever happens in the offseason with regards to the coach and all that stuff, I think that we just will follow where the facts lead us rather than speculation.
I will say that in the last week and a half, Pete Carroll has, for anyone who is paying attention, which I think people are intentionally ignoring this, has really put a lot of this to bed because there's been a lot of questions to him.
I agree.
About the direction of the team, about what Jody Allen, the owner, wants, what the team wants, and what the plan is. And the plan, whether everyone agrees with it being the right plan or not, the plan is to reset this again for next year because they believe that with Russ and DK and the talent that they've got, that with a few tweaks and a few adjustments and maybe a little bit better injury luck, that they can make a run at a Super Bowl. And when he says that they're going to bring everyone back, that does not involve trading away your franchise quarterback. Right. That's not bringing anyone back. And if you're trading away your franchise quarterback, you're admitting that next year we're not going to be competitive.
Right.
And that's
you're absolutely correct. You're absolutely right. And that's kind of the way that we've read this, probably for the last month and a half of conversation. We've kind of seen how this is kind of going and where it could have gone, and kind of in-season adjustments made this to where it seems to me, and I'm not speaking for you, but it seems to me that is the course, and he's said it as such, and you've reiterated that, and I tend to think that that's probably the most likely outcome, and I've believed that for like the last month at least, that is the most likely outcome, because change is the hardest thing to do and the least likely outcome. The no change is the path of least resistance, offers the most stability to the franchise, to the ownership, to the coach, and to the franchise quarterback, when you can identify the issues and understand what they were and know what it takes, at least internally, on an internal kind of self-examination that the team goes through every offseason. You identify those tweaks, those needs, those priorities, and you go attack that. Yeah. I mean, when you really take a look at it, and we've talked about this, it's like you got a couple of offensive linemen, you got maybe one more weapon, you've got a running back 1A, whether Penny is part of that equation or not, we can talk about that. Running back 1A, and on the defensive side, you need a piece or two on the defensive line, maybe a linebacker, and you need reinforcements in your secondary. And bingo.
You need a defensive tackle and a number one corner.
Yes.
And really,
this team, you would probably, with those pieces, you would probably add 4 or 5 wins.
Yeah.
So you're at 11.
If they went and got an elite corner, whether it be through the draft or through a trade or through free agency, if they went and got an elite corner, that defense would actually be significantly better. And I mean, the defense is the Achilles heel of this team, not Wilson, and not the offensive line's been bad, but
I've got some stats to kind of back that up too. But yeah. So let's talk about this Detroit game. Let's talk about kind of where we're at, where you see it, and where we go.
So we're going to get into this game. I think we have to start the discussion with Rashad Penny. I mean, 25 rushes, 170 yards, 135 of them in the first half. When the team just blew the doors open and the game was over at that point. 2 touchdowns, just absolutely looked explosive, elusive. He wasn't running into tackles. But he also wasn't avoiding contact. He was
even after contact, he was gaining yards. He was pushing forward.
he was exactly what this team drafted 4 years ago.
And has been missing for 2 years.
Yes.
Even with Carson here.
Yeah, they just have not had what Rashad Penny has been bringing to them the last 4 weeks.
Well, let's talk about the last 14 quarters. 12 quarters is it's nearly 4 games. So 445 yards rushing, 5 TDs, 8 plays of 20 yards plus. He had 5 plays of 30 yards plus within that. If you extrapolate that to a full season, that's 2,161 yards and 24 touchdowns. Now, obviously, that's not sustainable, and it depends on rushing defenses and teams trying to gear up to stop you specifically and so forth. We just haven't reached that level yet with him. And then injury is always going to be an issue, but it's nice to see what my overarching idea is. It's nice to see the offense as a complete whole form being able to execute the way that it's designed.
And that's one of the things is there's been a lot of criticism of Shane Waldron, the offensive coordinator, because of the way the offense is looked at times, and it's just inconsistency and inefficiency and that kind of stuff. I think that has been missing the context of the fact that the running game has been abysmal all year until Penny finally got healthy. It's been that they played 3.5 games without Wilson, and they played 2.5 additional games with an ineffective Wilson because he couldn't throw the ball because his hand was so screwed up.
And we're still number 7 overall in the NFL in DVOA.
Yeah.
Number 10 in passing, number 7 in rushing. Now, granted, that number 7 in rushing probably came up from about 11 or 12 before Penny went off this last 4 weeks. But nonetheless, 7 overall on an offense that has looked somewhat inept at times this year. And given the fact that it's been so lopsided as far as the defense being on the field, way more than the offense.
The defense just can't get off the field. They can't get a stop at any point.
And they're ranked number 25 overall DVOA, 27 against the pass, number 8 overall, though, against the run, which is good.
And that matches what I think we see on the field. I mean, I've always liked DVOA because I think it's really accurate. I think it's
you'll
really
love this.
well done together.
You'll love. Oh, now that you've said that, I got this next stat for you. You'll just love.
Do it. Roll it.
The last 18 quarters since Jamal Adams' injury. Ooh. We're 8th overall DVOA defense. That's 4.5 games. That's 25% of the season. Without Jamal Adams, we went up to number 8 overall.
What were we before?
Well, we're 25 overall. I'm just saying in that isolated amount of games, we're 8th.
Oh, okay.
So I don't know.
So, okay, I hear that. Who did we play?
That's the key.
Who are the teams?
We definitely improved our chances against lower level competition in the last 4 or 5 weeks.
Because the Lions are in there, right?
Bears are in there.
The Bears,
even though we lost to them,
lost to the Bears, but the Bears are awful. And Washington's in there, and was it the Rams or the 49ers being the other game?
Yeah, right.
If it's the 49ers, I mean, the 49ers are bad.
Or the Cardinals were in there too. I don't know. I don't know.
Yeah, I don't remember how all of those games pile in. But basically, you're looking at a group of bad teams. So
Texans. We forgot the Texans. So 49ers, Texans, Rams, Bears, Lions.
Yeah, that's not a...
Yeah, I mean, the 49ers are decent, and then the Rams, obviously. But so you had the Texans, the Bears, the Lions in there.
The 49ers aren't good.
Washington Football Club before that, but that was before Adams went out.
Yeah, and so
right when Adams went out.
But you're talking about some bad football teams. So look, I would take.
So we had a chance to get right, is what I'm saying. So our defense did look better at times, but still couldn't get off the field.
Yeah. So since we are discussing this, and we are saying that speculation is, what we avoid but end up having to do because it's our job here. What do you think the team does with Jamal Adams this offseason?
Yeah. Well, we doubled down, Keith, we doubled down on a decision that I think that was possibly the right decision for the wrong reasons when we made that decision. We were in a Super Bowl situation early in a season where I think the team felt it was one player away, a guy that is a playmaker that can be all over the field, that can just like dynamically change the wholesale direction of a team by himself. And it just didn't happen. And then he got injured that year with, thumb and his other hand and then shoulder. And, they had a hard time integrating him into the team. Now this year, they still seem to have a hard time figuring out what to do with Jamal Adams, at the first, and which I put on Ken Norton, and we can have a Ken Norton discussion, but they had a hard time figuring out what to do with Jamal Adams the first 5 or 6 games. And they finally kind of figured it out, and they ended up getting better, when he played a more traditional strong safety role. And the team was able to rely then on Diggs being in the right spots, and their coverages were able to tighten up a little bit better on the back end. So they didn't allow a lot of mistakes over the top all year, which was great, but tons of stuff underneath, and it was kind of messy. But so then Jamal Adams is Jamal Adams, and he plays with reckless abandonment. And part of that comes with the challenges of being injured. And he doesn't have the body. He doesn't have the body to play the way that he plays. And so this is going to be an issue for Jamal Adams every year. Every season is going to be how many games are we going to have Jamal Adams? Mm-hmm. And are we going to be able to figure out how to use Jamal Adams?
Not until we
right from the get-go. Yeah,
Not
right from day one.
Not until we get a defensive coordinator that actually is creative and
willing to answer your own question.
Things. Here's my own question, or the answer to my own question is, if they cut him, if they just say, you know what, this was a mistake, we cut him, he has a $19.2 million cap hit.
Yeah. I don't know that. I think he brings to the team more value than cutting him.
No, I'm just saying, like, if they cut him, or if they trade him, if they go, you know what, we're going to cut bait and we're going to send him off into the ether and let another team deal with him and take whatever we can get.
So you can get a 3rd round pick for Jamal Adams and get rid of his contract. I would.
No, you can't. But that's the thing, is you can't get rid of his contract, because
that would be a swallow. You'd swallow that no matter what.
By trading him or cutting him, you
how about a June 1st designation?
$19.2 million of you lose that much cap room by trading him. If you wait till
then you can't.
If you wait till after June 1st, then it becomes a $2 million cap savings. And that's really what it comes down to, is it becomes a
is he tradable? That's what it comes down to.
I don't know.
I think he's more valuable next year with the Seahawks than he is without, and especially if they're transitioning from Bobby Wagner. And we can have that discussion. So I think he brings value. The question is, it's not, people need to get over the 2 first-round picks. It's over. 3rd round pick, etc. It's over. It's done.
That was done.
What is his value today versus how much he costs? And I think he still brings enough value to the team where you keep him and you utilize him, as long as he's utilized in a way that makes sense. Like you said, the Ken Norton Jr. equation of that needs to be solved. Whether Ken Norton Jr. figures it out or whether he's gone, because it doesn't work right. It hasn't worked. It's not working. Like Ken we're Norton literally ranked 25th overall in DVOA, and you can call it a talent deficit, and that's kind of an indictment on John Schneider and Pete Carroll, because they built the roster.
Is it a talent deficit?
It is. Is it a talent deficit? When we walked into our September 1st podcast, right around there, or our prediction show, we didn't think we had a talent deficit, Keith. We walked in thinking our roster was pretty decent enough to get to 11, 12, 13 wins. We talked about.
We knew there was one position where there was a talent deficit.
Sure. Yeah. We knew that defensive back was going to be an issue.
Well, not just defensive back, because safety is fine. And that has borne fruit over the course of the season. It's cornerback. It is one position. And if you want to say defensive tackle, because
that didn't, I will have to say though,
the depth is light.
The cornerback position did improve if you can call it that. But we're still 27th overall against the pass. It is what it is.
Yeah,
people can call DJ Reed great or whatever. He's great. And Sidney Jones came and he really elevated the play and blah, 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 blah. It's like, no, these white guys were placeholder level players in a team desperate for any help that they could get. And they were next man up. They were the starters. They clearly wouldn't start for half the teams in the NFL. I'm sorry. They just wouldn't.
Yeah, Sidney Jones wouldn't. DJ Reed has played well.
He's played well, but I think he's out of his element slightly on that outside.
Well, he's fine on the outside, but he's a cornerback too. He is not a number one corner. He's not the guy.
Yeah.
Bringing him in and letting him be a starter worked when you had a number one corner opposite him, and you could roll safeties to him and help him out. And you had
we were middling.
Yeah. But I mean, but the cornerback is the bad position. But there is not. Okay,
so we went into this. We went into the season thinking we didn't have a talent deficit.
There isn't a talent deficit at the other positions. I'm sorry, there's not. Bobby Wagner and Jordan Brooks are
a great tandem.
They're a great tandem. They're one of the best best tandems in the entire NFL.
Quite frankly, we didn't get to the quarterback this year. We were bottom third of the NFL, if not bottom 3 in sacks, in pressures, in pressure rate, in win rate, etc.
And with that, and you're getting there with Alton Robinson, Taylor, and Dunlap on your roster, and Green, who, let's face it, Rasheem Green actually has played,
and Kerry Hayter,
really
who had 9 sacks last year, and then you had Benson Mayowa, who had 4 sacks last year that just fell off. And again, they put him out of position, and then they asked him to do too much. It was like,
but it doesn't matter.
Set up for failure anyway.
Yeah, but I mean, saying you've got,
and they ended up being 7th overall against the run.
Yeah. So, but look at the pieces that are there and then tell me it's a talent deficit. You look at stats and you're going to say it didn't work. They're very inefficient.
Well, I think the scheme,
28th or 27th
was misaligned with personnel.
Yes. And that is the Ken Norton Jr. conversation. You have to decide, is it a talent deficit?
I think it's a larger conversation, a little bit larger than that. I don't know that it's necessarily as easy as just Ken Norton. Because it is not Ken's scheme. It's Ken's the implementer, but it's the scheme of Pete Carroll, and Pete Carroll is a personnel guy as well as John Schneider, and they're the guys that bring in the talent to match the scheme. And I think that there's a little bit of failure there that we need to acknowledge. It's like Ken Norton Jr. can only do what he can do with the people that he's got.
Yes,
and
but
if they feel like as a tandem,
you're saying it's a talent deficit. It's not a talent deficit.
Well, what I'm saying is between Pete Carroll, hold on
that roster,
between Pete Carroll and Ken Norton Jr. And you know this, Keith, because these guys have been very successful in putting people in position to be successful for ages. I mean, this is their craft. That's what they do. Pete Carroll's excellent at it. He really is. For whatever reason, the last 2 years has been a complete cluster when it comes to putting the product on the field. And I don't get where the disconnect is. I don't know if it's a complete failure of one individual in Ken Norton, or if the personnel that we're bringing in those positions isn't matching up to the scheme that they're being asked to play.
But see, that's the thing is, what changed? What was the biggest thing that changed?
Well, the scheme has not changed.
The scheme hasn't changed, but the person running it did. Because I'll tell you that Gus Bradley did it
for 4 or 5 years, right?
Gus Bradley did a fantastic job of putting people in position to be successful. So did Dan Quinn.
Right.
Chris Richard less so.
They were excellent at it. All three of those guys.
And then you bring in Ken Norton, and now he's running a scheme with no attempt at adjusting what you do to the talent on your roster.
Yeah, and in-game stuff is really questionable.
there's simply none of that. There's no attempt to adjust what
And
you're
that's
doing
why,
to the talent.
and that would be why I would want Ken Norton Jr. gone. And I thought about this last year as well. It was the same sort of conversation that we had. And we were thinking Ken Norton Jr. would be the one that was, have his head lopped at the end of last season. And it wasn't. It was Schottenheimer. And so we were like, yeah, well, the defense did improve. We're going to give him a pass. Let's see what happens this year. Well, then we came into this year, and the same thing that happened last year happened this year again in the first half of the season. The defense was completely abysmal. And sure, there were some injuries that happened and so forth. But nonetheless, with the talent that we had on paper, quote unquote, we should have been a lot better. And we weren't right out of the gate. And for that, I think he needs to go.
Yeah. And this is what I was saying. You could look at that roster and you look at the players and the talent and what they've done in previous years and this year and whatever, there is enough talent on that defensive roster for that defense to be significantly better than it is. Yes, there's a weakness at cornerback. We all know it.
I think there's a weakness in the center pass rush as well from the interior of that defensive line.
Okay, fine, but that's also been a problem in Seattle for a long time. There's enough, but even with that, and the cornerback, there is enough talent on that defensive roster for this to be an above average NFL defense, and they're not
number 10 overall in the NFL, above average.
Yeah, somewhere in there. They're not going to be the best defense in the NFL. You would need some serious help at cornerback.
Yeah, I think
pass rush.
Yeah, I think there were two critical errors by this regime in the offseason that failed to get the players in here that would have made all the difference in the world. A interior pass rushing specialist and a shutdown corner. Because without those two things, we were depending too much on a 33-year-old pass rusher in Dunlap who regressed and then got less playing time. We were overly dependent upon a player that had not taken a snap in the NFL before this year in Darrell Taylor, who ended up stepping up and playing really well. But a lot of times that play ended up being out of position. He was playing strong side linebacker, then they moved him up, and then they dropped him into pass.
You're saying that you're overly dependent on something that actually turned out to be good. So I don't think that you can attribute
but it didn't start good. It started like a rookie, and then second half of the year, he got good. So what I'm saying is we went into the season with a couple of deficits on talent that didn't help the situation. That's all I'm saying.
But which
is more than just a Ken Norton Jr. problem.
There is still enough talent on that defensive roster for it to be a top 12 defense, not a 27th overall.
Is that a realistic
there is still
evaluation?
Enough talent.
Is that an outside looking in evaluation, or is that being just too close to the roster?
You can't tell me that with the way that Diggs has played at free safety, he has been fantastic this year. The way that you've got Bobby Wagner and Brooks at linebacker, having a talent like Jamal Adams, which was frankly not used in any constructive way for most of the season. And then the talent that they have at defensive end and pass rusher. The talent is there in this roster for it to have been a decent defense. It is not a decent defense. It is an awful defense.
The problem was that teams got around the pass rush easily enough because our defense was in soft zones so much that they were able to just dice and slice all year. So, not having the proper talent to run your scheme is having no defensive backs that are able to run this. Yeah, I know. And they just didn't. And that is a question for
there is enough talent on the roster.
The defensive
for the
backs,
roster to be
the
better.
Corners were so poor on this roster, Keith, that teams could pass it. Jared Goff could have had a 350-yard day with the Rams against this defense. I'm just saying that it was bad.
Well, Colt McCoy cut this defense apart.
Okay.
Why did Colt McCoy cut the defense apart? No, and I'm gonna stay on this because it's not the talent. It is the way the talent was used.
Why did Witherspoon leave?
Witherspoon left because he refused the run to actually do what the coaches were asking him
and
to do.
Then he ended up going to Pittsburgh, and ended up having 3 interceptions on the year, and
and he had a hard time getting
decent run.
He had a hard time getting on the field. The first 6 games, I think he had 8 snaps.
Yeah.
Then he got an opportunity to play because he'd been around the team long enough that he finally got on the field and ended up with three picks. The Seahawks have 3 picks by cornerbacks total this season.
I didn't even know they had that.
All 3 of them came in this last game.
So I think we're literally arguing about the same thing. Yeah. I think that we are acknowledging the idea that cornerbacks that was a separate issue all to its own.
So to say this the defensive roster was perfect is by no means true. I mean that would be absolutely like just false.
Right.
It is a flawed,
which I am attributing a little bit to John Schneider and Pete Carroll, because the reason that I am wanting to hold them at least a little bit of accountability to them is the idea that the offense was going to be explosive this year. We saw, and there were glimpses of that. So and Russ Wilson was primed and ready to go. We were all kind of ready to have that, new and shiny object in Shane Waldron to kind of, make it all exciting and so forth. To run a defense out there like they did on an otherwise potentially deep playoff worthy roster, I thought was negligent because
again,
it's tough because you needed a complete roster and they didn't have one.
Yeah.
They allowed Reed to leave and didn't have a replacement. And then they allowed Griffin to leave and didn't have an idea or a plan to adequately replace him.
See, the thing is that is this roster flawed defensively? Yes. Is it good enough to have gone and been competitive for a Super Bowl? Yes, the roster was. If you could put the players on the roster in a position to be successful, and you had a coaching staff led by Ken Norton on the defensive side of the ball that refused to put players in position that could be successful. They used probably the best in the box safety in the game right now as a deep safety for the first 6 games. You have a guy that last year despite missing a chunk of the middle of the season with injury, still set the NFL record for sacks as a defensive back. And they blitzed him like 8 times in 7 games over one stretch. They weren't using
Didn't end
their
up
talent
with a sack at all. And in fact, I don't even think he had a pressure this year. No pressures, no sacks.
They did not use the talent in ways where they could be successful. You had your most productive and efficient pass rusher in Taylor dropping into coverage regularly
instead of rushing the passer. By design, not because they were missing somebody that day. That was by design.
That was by design because the coaching staff was not using their talent in the way that they should. Go back to this last game. They gave up, I believe it was a touchdown because freaking Brian Monet, all 365 pounds of him, was in coverage.
I missed that. That's funny. I mean, I'd love to see a clip of that. Not that I would love to see a clip of that, but
you don't want to see a clip of that. No one wants to see a clip of that. No one wants to have seen it live either, because it never should have happened. But when you're dropping a 360-pound defensive tackle into coverage, you are asking to fail. And guess what happened?
And that happened a lot this year. Not with Brian Monet, but it happened with our defensive ends and our, and Taylor and our quote unquote 5 techs that we like
And we saw Robinson dropping into coverage. We saw
Benson
Rasheem
Mayowa.
Green. We saw Benson Mayowa in coverage. We saw Kerry Hyder. None of these players should ever be in coverage.
No.
Ever.
Well, there are a few exceptions. There are a few exceptions. In any defense, you're going to have some defensive end coverage on a couple of things. But
you're talking about zone blitz situations where you bring two linebackers, but you only want to bring 5, so you drop someone back.
Right. And these are just situational, right? But we saw it as
to take away a slant. We saw way too much, and we had guys. I mean, you should never, in any circumstance, have a 360-pound nose tackle in coverage. There is zero opportunity for that to ever be successful. It will never work.
I don't even know where we're at in this conversation, but I'm going to transition.
The only transition that needs to be made is away from Ken Norton Jr. as the defensive coordinator.
We both agree on that. That's
the transition.
I would love to be a fly on the wall when Pete Carroll fires him. That's all I'm going to say.
See, I would not want to be a fly on the wall in any of these exit interview meetings because I think Pete Carroll is going to blow smoke up Ken Norton Jr.'s ass, and it would just piss me off. That's where I'm at.
If Ken Norton Jr. is not on the team calling defensive play calls and he had to have a parachute out of the building and a soft landing, I'm okay with that. Whatever it takes to get him transitioned into his new life away from calling as a defensive coordinator for the Seahawks, I would be okay with.
See, here's when Ken Norton Jr. was the linebacker coach. He was the guy who enforced curfew during training camp, and he was the master motivator on the sidelines. And watching him teach a young Bobby Wagner and a young Bruce Irvin when they were just coming into the league was fun. He was, other than Chris Richard, my favorite coach during training camp.
I agree with that.
Just watching him work was a pleasure. He doesn't belong calling plays and designing schemes. He doesn't know what he's doing. And for all of Pete Carroll's ability to teach his assistants and get his assistants ready for promotion, he failed Ken Norton Jr. in that regard. Because Norton was never prepared for that.
Yes. It almost feels like a little bit of nepotism in a sense, in that Ken Norton and Pete have been married for a long time. Well,
and when Pete promoted Chris Richard, who had earned it and deserved it, Ken Norton was upset because he'd been with Pete longer.
Yes.
And so he left and went to the Raiders to become their defensive coordinator.
Right.
And he failed miserably and got fired halfway through his second year. And then Pete decided to bring him back and brought him back as defensive coordinator. And he admitted that losing Ken was hard on the team. It was hard on the roster. It was hard on the coaching staff. They needed Ken. But the only way to keep Ken was to promote him into a position he was not going to be successful.
That's exactly the way it went, Keith. That's exactly the way it went.
It is what happened. So they brought him back in a position where he's not built for. He's not trained for. He doesn't have the skills for. It sucks. But he doesn't belong there. But you know what the team could have done? They should have done this last offseason. Before this year, what they should have done instead of firing him is to promote him. Is to give him the Rocky Sato treatment that
assistant head coach of defensive.
Yeah. He's a defensive head coach or assistant head coach who helps run the defense. But then you have a coordinator who knows how to coordinate and knows how to do that job.
Yeah, I think it's hard. I know it's hard for Pete because he's so damn loyal, which I respect a lot, but it gets him into trouble. And what happened when it gets you into trouble? Then you got to have outside help, somebody in your ear that knows that the guy like that needs to go.
Pete was smart enough to know how to handle it with Rocky Sato. Remember, for those of you that are listening that don't know who he is, he was Pete's defensive coordinator at USC. Came with Pete to Seattle, but did not come as the defensive coordinator. He came as a general defensive assistant because he kept Gus Bradley, who had been the defensive coordinator in Seattle. He kept him on. When Gus Bradley left, everyone assumed Rocky Sato was the guy. He was ready to step in and take that role. And instead, they went outside the organization, kind of, and got Dan Quinn, who had left Seattle, left as the defensive line coach here to go become the defensive coordinator in college. And then he came back to the NFL as a defensive coordinator in Seattle. And in order to do that, he had to basically throw Rocky Sato a bone and promoted him to assistant head coach, and kept him around and kept him happy, and recognized that the team needed a guy like Rocky Sato, but also needed him not to be the coordinator because that's not where his talent lied.
I agree, Keith. Now the question is, what do we do? All right. So I gave you an opportunity to transition, and you turned me down, and you kept going on this subject for another 10 minutes, and I'm cutting you off.
You need to cut me off because we actually need to cut this entire show off.
Well, first, I wanted to talk about Phil Haynes for half a second, because he got his first career start at left guard against the Lions, and he actually did a pretty decent job. In fact, he had a really nice first initial block and then a secondary block on a linebacker to spring a real nice Rashad Penny touchdown, and I just wanted to call that out. And it's possible that Phil Haynes gets that second start, depending on what's going on with
Damian Lewis's ankle.
Damian Lewis on the COVID situation.
Is it a COVID situation too? I know that even if he wasn't on COVID, he probably wasn't going to start this week because his ankle has been bad since midseason,
and they may just elect to shut him down.
Yep.
And then Jake Curran again had a good game. Some are calling his pass blocking, the worst pass blocking grade in the NFL or whatever. But whatever, he's mastering the run blocking part of it, because I'm telling you, Rashad Penny running behind that big guy over there is crazy amazing.
They've been running to the right extremely successfully since Curran has been inserted into the lineup. And I disagree that his pass blocking is the worst in the NFL.
Well, especially after, in these last 4 games, Russell Wilson hasn't taken a lot of sacks. I mean, and the sacks that he has taken have kind of been self-inflicted.
Some of them.
I noticed a couple of them this last game. In fact, he got the ball away. He got the ball out. So he received a message that said, "Get the ball out." And so he in fact avoided a couple sacks by just throwing it away, which was a good sign.
And the sacks that have been a lot of them have been coming up the middle. It's been coming up through the center and through the revolving door of players that have been playing at.
I heard Posick. Had a good game against the Lions, but everyone had a good game against the Lions, so at least he had one. Also wanted to say, with the injuries that we had going into this game on the secondary, Sidney Jones was out. Bless Austin was out on COVID as well. John Reed had a concussion in the third quarter, apparently. So corner Michael Jackson, 6'1", 200 pounds, came in. He'd been on the practice squad most of the year, came in and took snaps, had 2 pass breakups on his only 2 targets, and played special teams all game. And so I want to just mention Michael Jackson as a player possibly to watch for. And see if they throw him out a restricted or unrestricted free agent contract in January, a futures contract, which they do sometimes.
How many cornerbacks have Seattle used this year?
I'm thinking like at least 10 since the end of training camp.
I mean, they traded Witherspoon right at the end of training camp. Had Flowers, they cut him. You've got Reed, Austin, Jones, and Brown as the guys that have gotten a lot of playing time.
Trey Brown, right?
Ugo Amadi, and you can also include Ryan Neal, who played cornerback before he became the starting strong safety.
Now this kid, Michael Jackson,
and before that it was Hellsop.
Calvin Hellsop. Nigel Warrior, which is a great name.
Yes, it's a fantastic name. I mean, this team.
So there's
this was a team that didn't have that.
There's 11 right there.
It was the weakest position on the roster And then they've had to go 11 deep at it.
Yes, right. Including a safety or two.
Yeah.
But nonetheless, right.
Oh, and Blair, Marquise Blair played.
Marquise Blair. Yeah.
Yes, he's a safety on the roster, but look what he was doing.
Nickel.
They were asking
He's playing
him,
nickel. Right.
He was playing nickel corner. So
yeah, I know. They really do need to solve that. I would imagine they're going to do a huge free agent signing, just to solve that position before the draft, because they have limited draft capital. I mean, they have, I think, let's just say 4 picks in the first 4 rounds, but a second round, a third rounder, and 2 fourths or something like that.
Yeah.
So they don't have a lot of draft capital to go out and find like a premier starter at that position. They might be able to find one there at the top of the second round, but do you pick a corner at the top of the second round when you have so many other needs? I don't know. I don't think so, especially given the track history of this this regime as far as corners. I don't think they go that high. Right?
Oh,
they haven't gone that high, right?
Yeah, haven't gone that high.
Right.
You're saying the track record of them. I'm like, this is actually, that's like one of the positions where this regime has been best.
No, they do well. I'm just talking specifically a draft spot.
I get what you're saying. And it's draft spot. Corner. No, they won't go that high. I mean, Shaq Griffin was a 3rd round pick.
Right.
And they won't go higher than that. I honestly believe they won't.
And that was a year where we were begging them to go second round.
Yeah. Trey Brown worked out until he got hurt. He was a 4th round pick. Or was he a 5th round pick?
Boy, you were hedging on that pick, though.
I didn't
like that pick.
I didn't like that pick. I did not like his tape. I still don't like his tape. I've gone back and rewatched some tape on him to see, like, okay, did I miss something? And no, what I saw was a guy that literally committed pass interference or defensive holding on every single play, and I hated it.
Yeah. And a guy like that with that much talent and makeup speed and stuff, my feeling watching some of that and us battling back and forth talking about the pick and stuff was he was taught that. That was the way that he was, schemed up, I think, in college. It had to have been. I
don't know. No one else on that team was playing that
knowing
way.
What we know now, I mean, it had to have been some of that anyway.
No one else was playing it. I just think he knew he could get away with it. But no one else on that roster was doing it in college. It was just him.
So one other stat real quick. Seahawks number 24 in the league in pass protection rankings. And that's a combined base Pro Football Focus grade, making up 2/3 of that. And then ESPN's pass block win rate makes up 1/3 of that grade. Mm-hmm. Seahawks ranked 24th, Rams number 1. So Stafford gets the most protection out of any quarterback in the league and still struggled the last 4 or 5 weeks.
Do you have that? Do you have that stat in front of you? Where are the Bucks?
I do not have it in front of me. I wrote it down.
Okay, because when you said the Rams were number 1,
if I remember, Tampa, the Bucks were like number 4 or something like that.
Tampa should be 1 or 2. Honestly, Brady gets a lot of credit this year, and he's played well and put up some incredible numbers. But his offensive line has been phenomenal. Stafford's has been very, very good too, and the Seattle's has been pathetic again. For the 18th year in a row.
Overall, now that we talked about DVOA, and we'll get out of here, I promise. We talked about DVOA briefly earlier, and you said you love that stat. Where do you think the Seahawks rank overall?
I would say probably 16.
They are the highest rated losing record DVOA.
Oh yeah,
ranking at number 12 overall.
12. That's. Yeah, I mean they'll be in the middle in that middle third. I said right at the halfway mark or around there, mainly just because I know their pass defense is bad, and but I know but their offense is way more efficient than anyone thinks it is. Yeah. Because it is explosive when it does work. And the run defense is great. The pass defense is awful. They can't get off the field on third down.
And their special teams was 4 overall, by the way. Even though Jason Myers struggled with some.
Yeah, but his overall stats are good.
Yeah.
Jason Myers is weird because everyone's like, oh, he's so inconsistent. And then he sets a franchise record for consecutive kicks in a row.
Yeah.
And then, But it does see that when he does miss, he tends to miss like 3 out of 5, and it's like really frustrating. And then he goes on this tear where he hits 28 straight or 37 straight or what it was.
And we're helped by one of the best punters in the game, and we were helped by DJ Dallas actually in the return game. He was ranked like 12th overall in kick returns this year.
And the Cody Barton, Nick Ballore, Ugo Amadi tandem at covering kicks, because
kickback returns.
Those guys get down the field in a hurry. So
wow, you know what we did? We just darn near had the season wrap up show. We can bottle this up, put a cap on it, and put it out next week.
Nah, let's not do that.
So fun show, fun arguments. We talked a lot about stuff that I had no idea we were going to talk about, which is good.
All I brought as far as prep was a whole bunch of stats from the Detroit game, which we didn't even get into.
I did the same. I know.
Whatever, but
that Detroit game. I'll just say this about the Detroit game: it was fun. Like it was just fun to be a fan and watching football of that game, and I knew 2 people that attended that game, and they were kind of texting me during the game about how much fun it was and sending me little video clips. I had one guy that lives in Phoenix here that I'm actually going to the Arizona Cardinal game with this next Sunday. He was at the Seattle game with his dad, who lives up there, and he was right on the goal line, about 50 seats up. And so he was showing me video of every time Seattle scored at that end. There was like 3 or 4 touchdowns right there. And one was Rashad Penny getting in from like 16 yards out, and then DK Metcalf with the really nice over the top touchdown. That was super easy. Just like a guy that was 7 yards off of him or whatever. Yeah, that was pretty. So that was just a fun game, where everything kind of came together, and you didn't have to worry about anything. You just could watch, and like you texted me, I was like, well, this has turned out really well for the offense. And you're like, yeah, but the defense is still really bad. I said, but it doesn't matter.
It doesn't matter. No, and the thing is that game, the Detroit game was what the season should have been, right? That the offense was just hard to stop.
Yes.
And other teams were gonna have to keep up, and they
weren't.
That's
exactly the way that we described the season before.
And they simply, even though the defense was flawed and made mistakes and whatever, gave up some plays, it didn't matter, because in the end they weren't going to keep up with Seattle's offense. And that's what the roster was built as. And Wilson's injury and a little bit of bad offensive line play early, and the defense just being far worse than we predicted in terms of their ability to get off the field, and just the time of possession issue that it created, just kind of derailed everything. But the Detroit game was how this season was designed.
Yeah. And it was fun to see the offense work off of developing over 4 quarters. Mm-hmm. It's like they set things up, Rashad Penny being able to run just really makes everything so much easier. Mm-hmm. It's like when you're able to run the ball, you can run play action stuff. You can get under the, you run different sets that look the same out of the, all the sets look the same. You run 5 or 6 different plays out of those, and your defense is just on the heels all game long. And so I just thought it was just a fun way to go about calling a game. I'm sure Shane Waldron was like, God, finally.
Finally. Yeah, because that offense, what it looked like there is what it's designed to do, where you can run the ball, you run it effectively. You're not running. I mean, they ran it a lot in this game because they got a lead, and they could, and the Lions couldn't stop it. But they ran it effectively. And
when you run for freaking 7 or 8 yards a carry, which is basically what it amounts to. I mean, you can't do anything wrong.
Yeah, and so and then you let Wilson, throw the ball on the move, roll the pocket, play action, take his deep shots when they're there. Yeah. This is what the offense is designed to look like, and they simply haven't been able to run the ball and pass block well enough.
Yeah, super efficient. Russell Wilson throws for 4 touchdowns, but he throws for less than 300 yards. Mm-hmm. You had 32, 33 rush attempts. Penny had 25 of those. Homer had 5 or 6, and Wilson had 1. Then you had some wide receiver, type stuff going on. And
Lockett
it
had
was
a
just
couple.
perfectly balanced,
I think
which
Everett
is
had one.
this is exactly what Pete Carroll is talking about when he talks
Yep.
about balance and running effectively and being efficient. This is like, this game should be like encapsulated. And every time Pete says that and people going, oh, he wants to run more. He doesn't want to run more. He wants to run more effectively. This is the game to watch.
Well, yeah. And if you run more effectively, then you extend drives. You run more plays because you're
Take
not
more time.
right.
Your
Yeah.
defense is better.
Yep. Your offense isn't scoring just on deep shots. And you're just running more plays overall, which means you have more opportunities to run the ball. But it all starts with being able to run it effectively.
Yes.
And it's something they haven't
been able to do.
And that's why
this offseason is going to be all about making sure that happens next year.
Yeah, they need a running back.
Pete Carroll said it came out of his mouth last offseason, and then they went and got Gabe Jackson, but then they didn't address the center position, and then they didn't figure out Shell long term. They didn't figure out what was going to happen long term over on that side, even though he kind of diminished a little bit the year prior. They went ahead and went into the season with that, and then the running back room was completely unsettled. Chris Carson, coming back off injury, knew that he wasn't going to last more than 12 games, if that.
He lasted 3.
Rashad Penny wasn't going to last because he never had lasted. He didn't until, he went into the mid-season with back and forth injuries and stuff, and then came on after that. You went into the season knowing that, yet you went in with that plan. And so this year, I think you're going to see the center position addressed. You're going to see long-term situation at left tackle or a short-term solution. Right tackle looks like we've solved that. You're going to go in with a new running back, probably. Cool. Whether they solve that in free agency or not, I don't know, but it'll be solved one way or another.
It's weird because if you go back 1 year ago today, we were having the same conversation about defensive end, that Pete Carroll went into the offseason saying, we're going to address the pass rush, and they didn't. And then they kind of had to piece stuff together and eventually trade for Dunlap and whatever. But then they came into this year with defensive end as they were loaded at defensive end a year late. And so they went into this last offseason saying, we're going to fix the running game. And then they didn't. But I'm going to be willing to bet that this offseason they're going to do what Pete Carroll wanted to do a year ago. And that's to get a center who can.
They need an identity, Keith. And I think the nice thing about this Lions game, and I know it was just Lions, but I think they found the identity that they've been looking for all year. And it came by running the ball and running it effectively. And creating that efficient offense. And
all the play action and getting the ball out of Russ's hands, because he doesn't need 40 yards. He needs 3. So he's okay taking that quick hitter pass to Everett in the middle if there's an opening there, and doing that kind of stuff, or throwing the quick ball out to Metcalf and letting him get upfield. And they did that kind of stuff because they were in 2nd and 3. Or 3rd and 1.
Oftentimes you would hear the announcers, and I picked up on this, this is like a throwaway down. Like I heard Talib say this 2 or 3 different times. They were 2nd and 1, 2nd and 2. And they were like, you can do anything here. You can throw the ball, you can hand the ball off. It doesn't really matter. It's like,
as long as you don't take a sack or give up a penalty or give up a penalty, you are. You can do anything you want. You can throw that deep ball because you come back, it's 3rd and 1, and you can get that.
Right.
So,
exactly.
Yeah. Anyway. There's a lot of that. Okay. Speaking of which, Talib as a commentator, I thought was very effective.
You like that tandem? I heard a lot of that everyone really kind of dug this particular tandem as opposed to the old dry, good old boy school of broadcasting.
I liked Talib. I thought he had interesting stuff to say. He's coming at it from a guy who is a Pro Bowl cornerback. So when he's talking about what offenses want to do, he's coming at it thinking about it as, okay, when I prepped as a defensive player, this is what we do. And so he has that perspective. And so when he was talking about, hey, offenses want to do this and this is why they do it and that kind of stuff, I felt he had something to say. He had something like meaningful to say. I like that tandem. Like, and I know it's like the thing to hate on every broadcaster that's ever lived, and everyone whines about, broadcasters for no matter who they are. But I thought Talib did a fantastic job. And
now, what was the other? Do you remember what the other guy's name was? I just don't off the top of my head.
I feel bad, but I don't actually.
He said Seahawks at some point in the show, and he lost me. I was like, oh, dude, you did not go there. And he corrected it, and I was like, dang, he says that all the time. He said that out loud, and he says that all the time when he's talking to buddies and friends about the Seahawks. And then he said it, in the call, and I was like, oh, don't do that. But yeah, I think overall it was, I know, whatever. It was effective. Like you said, it's nice and refreshing when they've got guys that have played the game that come in and have that real insight. That aren't homeristic, that aren't favoring one team or another, but just want to call a really solid game straight up and offer all that insight. I like that too. So.
I mean, for him, it was the defensive back perspective that was similar to when Tony Romo first came into the booth, and you had that quarterback perspective, and he would say, oh, watch the safety. If the safety comes up, they're going to throw this pass. And that's exactly what would happen. And having that from the quarterback perspective was awesome. And then Talib had that same kind of analytical, like idea as far as what he was doing. But instead of from the quarterback perspective, it was from the defensive back. The quarterback.
It would be interesting You just kind of gave me an idea about doing more trios in the booth
and putting both of those guys together.
Putting those guys together, similar matchups. Where you've just got that back and forth kind of thing going on, like the schematic sort of back and forth that you see during the game.
Yep. And then you pair him with someone like Al Michaels, who calls the game,
doesn't get in the way,
but knows how to shut up and let silence be and exist, which can happen in a television thing, and listen to other people and not trying to just keep talking. Al Michaels, Talib, and Tony Romo as a group, as a trio, would be phenomenal. That would be
funny.
That would be so much fun to listen to.
Yeah,
that would be.
And have Snoop Dogg in there just to add the balance, the flavor of having the real world shizzle.
You must have watched You must have watched the Manning cast.
Yeah. Well, I saw a little bit of it. A guy's got to have a spot. Yep.
I
Damn.
don't think rather than Snoop Dogg, bring in Marshawn. Because you want a guy that has that same
street cred,
that cred,
Marshawn.
And just. I gotta tell you, Marshawn's got it in spades more than Snoop Dogg, and I
that's funny.
I am not someone who's gonna bash on Snoop Dogg.
No, especially from the hood, the real hood.
It's all just respect for Marshawn. I love the guy, and having him come on that occasionally and just to be there and do his thing, that would be hilarious.
Yeah. Maybe the NFL should have a couple of event nights where they just kind of create this like over the top spectacle. They bring in these guys and, they just have fun with it. And that would be just kind of a special broadcast where, yeah. Anyway, find Keith on Twitter at Myers NFL. I'm at NW Seahawk. The show's at Hawks Playbook. SeahawksPlaybook.com has all the everything. And find us on your favorite podcast app and YouTube and subscribe. That would be awesome. And Happy New Year to everyone, including you, Keith.
And you too, Bill.
Go Hawks.
Go Hawks.
Seahawks Playbook Podcast listeners, thanks for joining us for another edition of the show. You can find us on Twitter. Bill is at NW Seahawk, Keith is at Myers NFL, and the show is at Hawks Playbook. You can listen and subscribe to the show at SeahawksPlaybook.com.